In Super Mario 64, when you first enter Shifting Sandland, you may notice something. Actually, you may not notice something, and that's important. Mario 64 has one core conceit for its level design and presentation, which is that various paintings in Peach's castle can be entered into, which opens up a whole world inside the painting that Mario can explore. And while that's a novel concept for its time, Mario 64 has become such a staple of video game culture that it's hardly noteworthy anymore. But in order to introduce people to 3D gaming proper and make the worlds feel fully realized despite the technical limitations, Nintendo had to be creative with each step of the process and how they presented their game. And while some elements of the game stand out, like the endless staircase, others are a bit less noticeable to those not actively seeking out meaning in seemingly insignificant details. But that's where I come in. In each level of Mario 64, we see the same opening just about every time. Mario somersaults from the open air and lands on the ground to start every level. This happens so often when you play the game that if you even noticed it a single time, by the end of the game, it fades into the background as not relevant info to the player. And that's intentional. By not highlighting this somersault that starts each level, the player is subconsciously having ideas about the game and its world conveyed to them in such a way that makes players feel comfortable in a fully 3D environment, which at the time would have been a largely new experience for most players. So let's talk about this somersault in more detail and what it means for the game. First, the somersault gets around a serious technical limitation. The concept of the painting worlds is a creative way to hide loading zones by making it feel as though separate loaded sections of the game are fully separate worlds, thus separate environments. By having the paintings function as an in-universe explanation for the sharp change in level geometry and the time it takes for levels to load, the somersault helps make the transition between seemingly unrelated areas feel more coherent. By somersaulting in, there's this implication that, as Mario has jumped inside the painting, he's jumping into the world contained within it. If instead he started the level just already standing on the ground, it would feel as though he had simply teleported elsewhere, which, although a feature of Mario 64 in its own right, would lack the proper tone or kinesthetic cohesion that the somersault provides. The second reason for the somersault is characterization. Mario's entire character is marked, from the earliest days of even the Donkey Kong arcade game, by confidence in the face of a seemingly insurmountable challenge. Mario is the perpetual underdog, a short, stubby, working-class average Joe whose confidence in the face of increasingly epic and dangerous challenges creates this sense that Mario is both like us and also an unlikely hero. That unlikely hero nature to Mario's character was true in 2D, but needed to be reconceptualized in 3D to make Mario work better in that environment. And so they added in a number of features in Mario 64 to help convey this characterization. They gave Mario an enthusiastic and carefree voice, a vast moveset that allows for all sorts of interesting and intricate forms of terrain traversal, and importantly, they gave his movement a sense of fluidity and an almost dance-like quality. The somersault helps convey this dance-like quality and carefree confidence by showing that Mario, rather than being in over his head, instead has so much confidence in his ability to save the princess that he'll front flip to the task at hand rather than simply falling into it. There's an elegance to the somersault that instills in players a sense of confidence that carries over into how they'll approach the challenge. It's the polar opposite of Luigi's Mansion, a game marked by an explicit lack of confidence in its protagonist. The somersault helps players feel like the challenge ahead is something they too can do. The third reason for the somersault is more practical, but ends up becoming essential, and this is why I use Shifting Sandland as the prime example. The somersault helps set the scene for a 3D environment. In 2D Mario games, there was only really one major direction for most levels: right. Early Mario games did actually convey this information to the player in a similar manner to Mario 64. In Super Mario Bros., Mario starts slightly to the left side of the screen, already facing to the right. This, more so than anything else, helps players understand intuitively that their path forward is in the direction Mario is facing. Shifting Sandland actually mimics this 2D design in a way that not all levels do. When Mario first lands, he's facing to the right in a two-dimensional sense, with the camera framing him in profile. This, like in 2D Mario games, conveys the direction the player should head in. But Shifting Sandland is different from 2D Mario games. In 2D Mario, there's really only one direction for the entire rest of the level, to the right. And the same is not true of Shifting Sandland, given the fully 3D environment and open-ended design. So in order to make Shifting Sandland work in a similar manner to 2D Mario, there needs to be more information than just which direction to start heading in. Shifting Sandland accomplishes this by having a clear indicator of not just where to move towards, but where you're expected to end up. The reason the somersault is important is because it conveys three-dimensional information at the start of every level that a flat starting shot of the level can't convey. Actually watch what ends up in frame during each somersault and you'll start to see a pattern. The somersault helps to indicate potential paths forward, potential places of interest, and how to get from point A to point B. In Shifting Sandland, the somersault's camera movement initially shows the pyramid as the most prominent object in the map, showing that it's behind a small sand dune in a 3D sense. Then, the camera pans towards Mario as he lands and creates a 2D image. Mario, then the sand dune, then, in the background, the top of the pyramid. This scene conveys so much information so subtly that most players won't notice it. Mario's direction tells us that we should start moving to the right. The somersault revealing the 3D image of a pyramid tells us that the sand dune is not a wall, but just a hill that we can cross, either by walking over it or around it. Then, the 2D image tells us that the pyramid is our final destination we want to head towards, and it even indicates the importance of the top of the pyramid. If we see how the level actually pans out, this image helps convey most of the goals we'll have to accomplish in the level. Klepto circles around the pyramid, there are 3 stars inside the pyramid and 1 star on top of the pyramid, meaning that 5 of the 7 stars in the level emphasize the pyramid, leaving only the red coin and 100 coin stars. By portraying the opening of the level in this way, Shifting Sandland communicates to players a sort of ludic arc, where the player will start far away from the pyramid, circle around the level, and inevitably find themselves in or atop the pyramid. The starting camera angle for the level tells people this information in a 2D sense, while Mario's somersault and the camera movements that follow him while he does it convey similar information in a 3D sense. It's taken for granted these days, but in the early days of 3D games, it was not always obvious where to go next, and blunt level transitions that break physical continuity like in early 3D games further make it difficult to know exactly where to go. Mario 64's dev team had to think about how people will come to understand a 3D environment, so these level transitions function to continually familiarize players again and again with each level every time they go for new stars, such that 3D becomes intuitive the same way that Super Mario Bros. Made scrolling 2D screens intuitive, in an era where scrolling screens were not yet commonplace. While Shifting Sandland is my favorite example in the game, each level conveys interesting meaning when it comes to the level transitions and the usage of the somersault or the occasional lack thereof. Let's talk about some of the most interesting examples elsewhere in the game. In Bob-omb Battlefield, Mario lands facing away from the camera, immediately helping convey both the direction that players should go in when starting the level, and also the implied 3D nature of the game with the Z-axis emphasized by the direction Mario is facing. We see in the foreground a cannon that can eventually be used by Mario. We see Chain Chomp's gate atop a hill that Mario likely can't reach without going around, a dirt path suggesting the way that the Mario will get onto that hill, the island in the sky up in the distance, and King Bob-omb's hill in the very back. All of the important locations for stars are shown in the very first image, and we even see 2 red coins for good measure. In Whomp's Fortress, we see a platform that is not very high when we first somersault in, suggesting that this is going to be a more vertical level. When we do land, we see that the platform's wall is likely too tall to jump over, but there is a tree directly next to Mario that we might be able to learn is a way in which we can jump over said wall. Most of the important stars are over this wall, and one important star requires the tree in specific. Mario is facing to the right, suggesting this time the first move for the player to make is to go to the right. And with a path just barely in view on the right side of the camera, the player immediately knows the intended path for eventually getting to the top of Whomp's Fortress. When we first somersault into Cool Cool Mountain, we see a penguin on top of a small platform above a cabin. This hints at the correct answer to which penguin has gone missing that we need to return to the mama penguin for the second star in the level. There are 2 stars that will be collected inside the cabin, and including the penguin missing star, the rest of the stars will be found at some point by going down the slide that's to the left of Mario in the starting shot of the level. Mario is facing to the left, but is positioned such that, from a 2D perspective, the cabin is also to the left of Mario. As such, it's implied that all of the stars will require going down, either into the cabin slide or down the main slide of the level. Big Boo's haunt begins with maybe the most blunt and obvious image. The massive mansion directly ahead of Mario will be host to the majority of the stars in the level, and so there's really only one starting path for the most part. Go directly into the doors that Mario is facing and that are directly center frame in the shot. But the somersault also reveals at least one more obscure star to find, which is the star that requires defeating Big Boo atop the balcony. We see Boo briefly in frame as we somersault, hinting at the later boss fight while suggesting, because it's not visible after landing, that this is a later star that we need to get, and not our first goal. Wet Dry World starts with a somersault from very high up that serves multiple functions for conveying the arc of the level. First, it shows the top of the first area of the level as a place of importance. Mario is even facing to the right towards this area from a 2D perspective, and from a 3D perspective he's facing towards the town that'll be found by going through the loading zone behind the fence in the corner of the map. That said, if you enter into Wet Dry World, you might find that the starting screen is a bit cryptic. People familiar with Mario 64 likely already know that the water level of Wet Dry World can be altered in the level, but can also be altered by how high you jump into the level's painting. This is the second reason why the somersault starts so high. Because if you set the water level higher, Mario falls a less significant distance. The somersault actually implies the possibility that the water level can start higher by being egregiously high of a start if you set the water level low when you first enter. The higher you enter, the higher the water gets. And if you start the level with the water at its highest, the starting screen shows a much more obvious path forward for Mario. He simply swims to dry land directly ahead. The Bowser levels are different in a few respects worth noting. First is that they are the only levels that are almost exclusively linear, not including secret levels. Second, they always start with the camera facing not towards the challenge, but towards Mario in profile, with the challenge implied to the right. This, to me, is meant to specifically evoke the memory of 2D Mario, suggesting that these levels are the embodiment of the 2D concept of Mario but in 3D, a linear series of platforming challenges with only one path and one destination, the inevitable face-off against Bowser. By recreating the imagery of a traditional 2D Mario level in 3D, with Mario not center frame but slightly left of center frame while facing to the right, it evokes those memories of 2D Mario subtly without feeling like a distinct callback, while also conditioning us to think of these levels the same way we think of 2D Mario levels. Go right. And the third interesting detail about these levels is that there's no somersault. This is not coincidence. All levels in which Mario falls into the loading zone rather than entering via a painting creates continuity with the falling action by having Mario start the level continuing in that falling action. The Bowser fights all start with falling into a hole, most interestingly a trap hole in the case of Bowser in the Dark World. And while some of the other levels in Mario 64 use the somersault to imply a progression and use the opening shot to set a scene and create a sense of cohesion thematically, the Bowser levels intentionally do the opposite, literally pulling the rug out from under the player by giving us no information about what these levels will entail. Think about it like this. Whomp's Fortress displays on the painting the general image of what the level is going to be. Most of the levels have a sense of clearness about what the level is going to entail before you enter it, and in the few cases where there is no indication, such as Shifting Sandland, the opening shots of the level make up the difference heavily so that the player knows exactly what to expect. So the fact that the Bowser levels tell us next to nothing when starting the level creates this sense of mystery and danger. It makes you feel like what lies ahead could be a lot more serious than anything you've seen yet. This contrast is not just portrayed through music, but through how the scene gets set differently from the other levels. The lack of a somersault into these levels also takes away just a little bit of that adventurous, carefree confidence that characterizes Mario, letting the player know that playtime is over. These somersault transitions are a vestige of 3D gaming still being in its very early stages. Mario games eventually trended towards more cinematic openings to levels, with short cutscenes indicating the next important goal, beginning as early as Sunshine. And while opening shots of games including future Mario titles can still set a tone and communicate the intended next path, levels became bigger and bigger, to such a point that openings to levels no longer communicate a broader ludic arc. This makes Super Mario 64 somewhat special in that large portions of a level's contents and things to discover can be understood within seconds of beginning a level. I would argue that the game that came closest to capturing this phenomenon was Mario Galaxy, because of Galaxy's planetoid systems effectively turning each planetoid into a micro-level that, when Mario lands, immediately conveys the broader ludic arc of that specific planetoid. And while that is in itself great design that could be the topic of a future video, no game managed to quite capture what makes Mario 64's level introduction so good at subtly guiding the player towards the correct path of play. Thanks for watching. This video is part of an ongoing series of videos I'm making about brief sections of games that communicate meaning through play. If you enjoyed this video, I have 2 more like it, one on Mario Sunshine and one on Luigi's Mansion. Be sure to check those out, and also feel free to check out my longer videos on games, especially my videos going in depth on Shadow of the Colossus and Half-Life 2. This video in particular was inspired by a video series idea I had a few years ago, where I would analyze the game space of various early 3D platformers and compare each one to different artistic genres or movements, looking at them through the lens of art history. I have a lot of ideas for series that I can't quite get off the ground at this time, but I'm hoping that if I can build up enough of a following, that I can use the support to try to make some of these more ambitious projects happen. So if you're interested in how Super Mario 64's level design reflects the artistic philosophy of Impressionist paintings, then let me know in the comments. And lastly, these videos wouldn't be possible without the support of my patrons over on Patreon. Patrons get access to longer video essays early, get their name in the credits, and have been instrumental in helping me be able to improve with each video and continue to make them at the pace that I have been. If you'd like to support the channel, join my Patreon, link in the description. Thanks for the support, and see you in the next one.